and welcome to the Daisy Tunic, the second in the series of Raglan tunics with long and short sleeves with a fabric provided from myfabrics.co.uk or stoffe.de in Germany. You need first of all the pattern. For each size there is an individual file, so 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, etc. You need to cut around all the lines, including the dashed line. Check the test scale, make sure it's 5 centimeter. That way you can be sure you've printed your pattern off correctly. I used a two-way stretch jersey for the top part of the dress and also the lower part, but you could use any fabric you like for that really. I've applied also some little circles which are from the top fabric, used heavy top stitching because I really like that. And I've also used a hem trim which rolls from the inside to the outside, which is very easy to do and it looks really neat. The sleeves are rolled up sleeves, and I'm going to show you a little industry trick to make this look like really clean, which is very simple to do. I've used Babyville poppers or cam poppers, they're exactly the same from Snapply. Here they are, you've got that special tool to use with it. It's dead easy to do and I think it looks very effective. I've also used some iron-on Vilene for the inside of my facing. I did it only in the area of where the popper goes. So in your pattern pack you've got the short sleeve, which you see me use today, and then we've also got the long sleeve, which has got a tunnel for the elastic at the bottom, so you could just sew that on, turn it around, turn it up and thread through some elastic. But you could also use it as a trim which lies on the outside, which I've done on a different dress, which looks really nice. So we've got the facing too, and then we have got the back here. Now the back has a curve, so naturally we need to cut it in two parts and not on the fold like the hem trim that's down here. The front is cut on the fold and has a hem trim on the fold as well. So altogether these are the pieces we need to cut out our dress. That isn't really very much. When you're cutting out your dress, you need to make sure that you fold over the fabric just as much as you need to cut out your front or your back. You don't want to waste any because a lot of these fabrics are quite dear, and that's what you pay for quality. Make sure that the arrow is parallel to your selvage, that's the side of the fabric. And then where you have the fold, you need to put it directly on. Make sure it's not a little bit off. Some people tend to do that, or they would just want to leave a bit. No, don't leave any. Just put it directly on, and then when you're cutting out, cut so that the fabric is on the left side of your scissor. That's much easier to cut. Mark the center of the front. For the back, you need to mark as to the point where we want to sew the back together. And again, you're cutting from the left, and you've got two separate pieces for the back. The sleeves I've decided to cut separately simply because I want to get as much out as I possibly can, and I'm saving about 6 or 7 centimeters like this. If you're not fast because you bought loads of fabric, then just fold over your fabric and cut it out. But because I only had 60 centimeters and I wanted to get out vice versa dress, which is called the Amelie dress, is slightly different. It uses the same fabric, so I wanted to get that one out. So I was very aware that I had very little fabric and I was very careful. Now for my hem trims, I'm using a lime green two-way stretch jersey. And again, I need to put it on the fold before I cut it out. And you need to mark the center of the top part, but also the center of the hem, because that's what we're actually putting on. And I actually forgot that and thought afterwards, oh, it was a bit silly. You should have just done that. So you mark your front and your back. I mark the front with 1 snip and the back with 2 snips. Some companies do it differently. You just do it whatever you feel most comfortable with. The facing has got a grain line, but it really is absolutely irrelevant where you put it. You put it on so it's on the fold, so you get it out, you don't waste fabric, because with two-way stretch, it's stretchy any old way. So just get it out as best as you can, and then mark the beginning of the sleeve and the end of the sleeve so that you know where the facing has to go in that area. Now for those circles that I cut out, I've put some Violin on, but it's much better to put Bonder or Wonder Web on there because you can peel the paper off and it works better. Here you can see me pinning each one of the dots in. Of course, if they're ironed on, that's much better. I'm using some border tissue paper underneath it, which will stabilize the whole lot so that when I'm sewing, it doesn't become bobbly and it stays nice and smooth. So I'm using a triple stitch, which is the stitch on your sewing machine which has 3 lines next to each other that are commonly used for stretch fabrics, but using it to do embroidery is really cool because it is a very thick stitch, obviously going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. It looks really, really nice, so I tend to use it a lot. Now if you're really brave, you could use contrast thread, but I thought, well, I'm not sure I'm going to do it as tidy as that, so I just used a matching thread. Then you can just pull off that stabilizer or tissue paper and it's done. Give it a good press and then close the side seams, iron those apart. And next I've actually put 2 more dots on that area, so the side seam is kind of almost like hidden so the design carries on, which is quite nice. And now we can put that away for a bit. Next we're going to trim the area of the fastening where we don't need the fastening. So the right hand side gets cut off and then you take your facing and you put that down with the right sides facing so you know which one you have to trim. It is very unwise to do this while you're cutting out, especially as a beginner, and even when you know what you're doing you still get it wrong. Trust me, I have. Cut it back when you cannot make the mistake anymore, which is now. Then you overlock the center back seam from that point to the hem. Retain the stretch. Then overlock the facing as well all the way around. And the lower part of the sleeve, make sure that you've retained the stretch in there. So put the back on top of each other, and where you have the snip, line it up with the other snip. Obviously they need to line up anyway, so it's dead easy. Put a pin in there to mark that spot and then sew it with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. I don't pin this really, I just hold the end together and then I move my edges on top of each other, and the centimeter seam allowance is commonly the first line next to your presser foot on your needle plate. So you just line the fabric up with that, and that's what you concentrate on. You can see me here just shimmying the fabric over a little bit so it all is nice and flat and on top of each other. Secure at the end. Now when you do a raglan, this is how it works. You've got the sleeve which goes right in the middle of the front and the back like this. It's actually the easiest sleeve you could possibly do. So fold one over and put a pin in, just one pin at the bottom, not everywhere. Then fold the next one over, put a pin in, and that's what you do all the way around. So you have got them actually in the right place, and when you go on your sewing machine to sew them together, you can't get it wrong. Now we're going to just pinch with our hands the top of the fabric where it needs to go together, and then move the edges on top of each other. Next, we'll just overlock the lot so it's nice and clean, and then we are ironing all those seams towards the body center. And next we're going to top stitch on top of the front. So I've done that here so you can see it from the back. Next we're going to put on our facing. And And when you pin on your facing, I like to do it from the side where I can actually see the seam, so that I don't sew too far, sew into it and get it caught, because that's very, very annoying. So now I just put my snips onto my raglan shoulder seam on either side, and then pin it all the way round. Some really brave people would just go for it and say, well, the snip's are in the right position, I'm just going to put it under the sewing machine without pinning it. But I think if you are a beginner, the pinning is absolutely vital here, because it can kind of shimmy around. You might not have cut out so well, or you might have not sewn the seam allowances so well, so you might have to fiddle it a little bit. So only do that when you really can sew, that you just bang it on there and go all the way around. So when you're sewing and you get to this point where the round bit is, it doesn't really matter what seam allowance you take there. I mean, you can see that I'm not using a centimeter, I'm just going like foot width. In fact, I do it different on every dress. The main thing is that you do a nice even round, and some people might want to draw a little pencil line around the curve so they can get it spot on. But the more experience you got, the more you fly by the seat of your pants really, and you just go around there and it'll come out right. Just keep lifting the presser foot up, going a little bit, lifting again, you know, turning it. And then you come back the other way. Make sure it's nice and flat underneath what you're doing. And when I've done that, I just have to trim what I've been doing. Now here it's very important that you cut right to the quick, because otherwise it will be puckered when you turn it. Cut back your curve, about 3 millimeters I would say, no more than that, quite tightly. But then at the top you don't need to cut it back as much as that, you just trim it a little bit. So you've got about 0.5 centimeter left standing. Cut across the corner. You can snip a little bit and don't over snip it, because actually it's a two-way stretch, so it's stretchy, so it might actually hold in your neckline if you don't over snip it. But especially around there where you've got the raglan sleeve on either side, that really does need a snip. Then you turn it. And next we're going to understitch the seam allowance like this. So with the seam allowance facing towards the facing, you stitch about 2 millimeters from the edge. And what that does, it gives you a beautiful edge like this. Now some people say, okay, I don't really like this understitching. It always sort of never works for me. So in that case, just leave it out. And when you press it, you want to already pin it as you go along, so it's really nice and flat all the way around. So I've done that now, and I can now top stitch from the outside, from the back seam of the raglan all the way around. It looks really daft if you start right at where the fastening is. It doesn't work because of the round part of the fastening. So start here where the sleeve starts. You can mark it with tailor's chalk if you like. I just go by the markings on the sewing machine, but it might be easier to have the chalk mark, especially if you're doing it for the first time. Reverse your stitching, and now all we have to do is kind of sew in the fastening. I would do it by hand actually. You can just sew a triangle from the outside, which I did too as well, but I think that this is the way to do it. Very simple. Now we're going to put the fastening in, so go through with your pointy tool and put on the lower button, which is a totally flat one, and then you have got the one which has got the ridge on the outside. That's the one that goes on next, and you press that one down. If you get it the wrong way around, it really doesn't matter too much. I have done that on the other dress, got it wrong, still shut, so it's okay. Press it down. Then you do the top one as well, so flat one goes at the top. And actually, just to point this out, you can cover this button as well. It works really well on a very light fabric. You can cover the button. I've done that on a couple of fabrics, and it's actually really nice. And people think, oh, it's a cover button. Oh no, it's a popper, and it's really cool. So you can do that. Close, and we are done. Next, we're going to go do the side seam, but we're going to do it in one go on the overlocker, and we're not going to pin this because it's absolutely lethal to use pins, because if you sew over your pins with your overlocker, your knife will be absolutely can't find the right words now. Well, it will break, so you will get a new one, and it's very expensive, so you don't want to do that. So overlock, move the edges on top of the edges all the way down, nice and taut. Keep a bit of tension there, because otherwise the overlocking might become too tight. There you go. Make sure you have that shape in as well. Next, we're going to do the arms. Turn the arms in like that, and then we're turning them up again, and that gives you that turn up. So how to do this? You want to turn it in, or it's just underneath where the seam goes, and you can always use your pattern for that and see as to where you need to turn it in, and you pin it. Could of course turn the whole dress inside out to do this a bit easier. I was just like wanting to do it really fast. And now that I've done that, from the inside I'm sewing all the way around, so you're just turning it towards you. It's much easier than this looks, and because you've pinned it well, it can't really go wrong. So you stitch a bit, roll it over, and there you go. Take out your pins, and we can now do the turn up. So I've just turned it up how I want it, and then I'm stitching in my seam like that, backwards and forwards, and it's attached. And I also do a little holding stitch right on the side of the sleeve, and that way it can't roll down there either. You could put, of course, a bow or a flower or something else there, especially if you are using different type of fabric. Now for the hem, you want to stick the hem in so the right side is facing the wrong side, and we're going to pin this in. And once I've sewn this in, I can just roll out my hem, but I want to do some understitching again. I want to stitch on the dress this time, really force it apart and make sure that the seam is facing towards the actual dress and not the hem. And once that's done, you give that a jolly good press and it will sit beautifully. Then you just turn in the top edge like I've done here. Alternatively, you can just put rickrack across it or something, but for this, because it's very busy already, I didn't do this. But of course, a ribbon, rickrack, anything that you can find would also go very well. I just stitched it across because I wanted a slightly cleaner look for this, not so playful. I think it would have been just too much. So do up the button on your dress, turn it over, admire your handiwork, and you're basically done. If you want to make the Amelie dress, which has a dropped waist and a ruffle, then you can just go over there, click on the link and watch that. It's got long or short puff sleeves and it's just done with ribbing. You can mix and match both these patterns together, exchange the sleeves, that's absolutely fine, and there will be quite a few videos popping up on my website showing you how to do these different dresses. You can dress them up as Christmas dresses. You can even dress them up as princess dresses. So thank you very much for watching Frocks and Frolics.